Hello, good afternoon, buenas tardes. I'm Gabriela Domenzain from the Center for Immigration Law and Policy at UCLA Law, and I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. I want to start by saying that the Center for Immigration Law and Policy at UCLA Law acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. And I also want to say Feliz Dia de los Muertos. Today, November 2nd, is the Day of the Dead in Mexico. And so we brought a Catrina here to celebrate and remember those that are no longer with us. Some technical points at the beginning, please. This is a bilingual program. Parts of it will be conducted in Spanish and parts will be conducted in English. So for those of you that want to see this program as is, you don't need to do anything. For those that want to hear the Spanish parts simultaneously translated into English, please go to the bottom of your screen, click the globe icon and select English now. Y para aquellos que quieren escuchar este programa en español, por favor busquen el icono de un mundo en su pantalla. Debería de estar abajo a la derecha, lo presionan y seleccionan español. And with that, we'll begin. First, I want to issue a content warning here. I want to let you know that some of the language that you'll hear today will be really offensive. And while we want to be mindful of that, we also want to be true to the historical record we'll be exposing. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the most prosecuted federal crimes in the United States, 8 U.S.C. 1325 and 1326, known as illegal entry and illegal reentry. The laws were written in 1929 by eugenicists, people who believed in white racial superiority and the pseudoscience of eugenics, who, as you'll learn, did not want Mexicans coming here or staying here. And while the Constitution prohibits Congress or any other government actor from passing laws that intentionally discriminate on the basis of race, prosecutions of 1325 and 1326 have ballooned over the past 20 years, with the US government spending up to $1.4 billion a year prosecuting people, mostly Mexicans, for trying to come to the US without authorization or coming back after having been deported. But a novel legal strategy and coalition has emerged over the past 2 years to prove that these laws are unconstitutional in the courts because of their racist intent. And we'll be welcoming those at the helm of this movement later on in the program. But first, we'll start with a conversation I had with Alejandro, our first guest who couldn't be with us today, but agreed to be interviewed by us here at the Center for Immigration Law and Policy. He's a 36-year-old father of 3 from San Diego who has been entangled by these laws since he was 18 years old, over half his life. And he's one of thousands of Mexicans and Latinos imprisoned by them today. Chloe, if you can please hit play, I'll see you guys on the other side. Thank you.
This call is now being recorded.
Hi, Alejandro. Thank you so much for talking to us. Okay. All right, Alejandro. We are going to start, okay?
Okay.
So, Alejandro, let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us where you are right now and how long you've been there?
Well, right now I'm currently in federal prison in Lompoc, California, and I've been here. Well, I'm going on 18 months, and I'm here due to a reentry and violation of supervised release for being illegally in the country again.
Where is your family?
My family, currently they're in National City, California. My 3 kids are with my mom. and they've been with her in her custody for the past 3 years, though 4 years.
When was the last time that you were able to see or hold your children in person, Alejandro?
The last time I seen my kids was about 18 months ago, before I was arrested for trying to come and be with them in San Diego, California.
How old are they?
My daughter, she's the oldest. She's gonna be 16. My oldest son, he's 14, and my little boy, he just turned 7 about 2 months ago. And like I said, I haven't seen him in a while.
Thank you for sharing that, Alejandro. I'm asking it because I know that coming back to take care of your children is the reason why you're in federal prison.
Yes.
You know, you're serving time for illegal reentry right now, and you served time for this before.
Yes.
Since the first time you were deported, how many years of your life have you spent in federal prison for trying to come back to your family?
In total, I think I've been in federal prison about like 3.5 years, and in immigration holdings, and then state prison or county jail, I've been there like about another 2-3 years, like in periods of times, you know, months and weeks, holding, waiting, and then being transferred state to states, being held in different immigration facilities just to be deported again.
Tell me about, you know, growing up in San Diego. Tell me about your childhood there. You know, what do you remember?
Well, what don't I remember? I remember everything from kindergarten, the Head Start program, daycare. I even think I was here. I've been here all my life since I was in diapers. I've been here since I was like 2-3 months old. So this is all I know, San Diego, California. Literally San Diego. I've only been out of San Diego like about a year or two. But all my life I spent here. I'm 36 years old, and all my years have been here besides the ones I spent in prison for reentries.
How long had you lived in San Diego before you were deported to Mexico the first time, Alejandro?
I was 18 years old when I was ordered to be removed. I've never been in state prison. All my criminal history is reentries. I had legal status when I was a kid, but due to something dumb that was put on me, I was just deported for not showing up to a court date that I wasn't aware of, you know. And
yeah, you were charged in absentia, right? Which means that you didn't show up, and you were ordered deported.
Yes.
And that's what kind of started this whole thing that
yes.
made you start getting to get the 1326 prosecutions, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said,
and you didn't know
no.
that you had a court date, that you
no.
had to show up, nor did
no.
your lawyer.
Because come on, who wouldn't want to go show up to a court date when their life is at risk of being deported? You know, it's something so easy that I can go and show up, and there's no reason for me to hide from it, you know. And sadly for that, I'm paying the consequences. 16 years still, you know, and it's taking a toll on my kids, on my mother, on my family. You know, that they're left with my kids, and thankfully they're stepping up to take care of my kids.
What was that like, finding yourself in Tijuana?
Oh, that was like man, like I don't even know how to explain it, but it was harsh because I was thrown into a country where they say I need to stay, but once I hit there, it wasn't like a welcoming party, you know. It was rough. I had to endure a lot of things. You don't blend in, and it sucks because I'm Mexican. I should blend in right in with them because I'm from that side, but that's not the case. I'm an outsider. I stand out like a sore thumb out there.
Alejandro, the first time that you were deported, your first child was about to be born, correct?
Yes, and those are the reasons I keep coming back, because I can't give up on them. You know, it's not right. It's not their fault that they have a dad that's in a legal bind that he can't be here, even though he's been here all his life. You know. And it's hard for them. Of
course. Alejandro, did you ever seek protection from the United States given the violence that you faced in Tijuana?
Actually, I did. I went to the port of entry and I I surrendered myself seeking asylum, but due to the COVID, they told me that they weren't accepting people, even though I had all my wounds, fresh wounds, and a busted head open with stitches, and I had my doctor's papers that I ended up in the hospital due to cartel violence. They denied me entry. They said that they weren't accepting people because of COVID, and they didn't believe me. So, it resulted to me being in federal prison again because I ran from being tortured again. I didn't want to get killed, and now that I'm here in federal prison, I'm away from that, but it sucks because I'm incarcerated away from my kids. But at that, I'm not giving up. I'm still trying to find a better solution to be around my kids and be with them because, like I said, it's not that I just made kids and, oh, hey, I'm back. No, I've been through them like since they were babies, like I said, since they were born. I've been there. I took them to school. I taught them how to tie their shoes. I took them for ice cream for after Friday when it's school days off. I do functions with them. We go do creek cleanups. We go to the lake, skip rocks. We chase the ducks. We go to the beach. All that thing, they're missing out on that, and it's sad because I know they're feeling it. They just sometimes don't tell me. But I know they miss all that, pizza nights, movie nights, just lounging in the house, going out to the swap meets, and to the mall, and all the groceries, making them pancakes at the house. They miss all that, and it hurts me because there's no way of me explaining to them the reason I'm in the situation that I am, because they're so young and they don't know about immigration. They just ask, why can't dad be home? Why does the neighbor have his dad? Why does my friend have his dad and mom wake up in the morning? I can't give them that answer without them actually understanding why I can't be with them,
Yeah. Alejandro, we're going to be joined by your mom, Norma, and your cousin, Elizabeth. And I know that they've been incredible support for you.
Yes.
Is there anything that you want to tell them?
Well, I just want to thank them from the bottom of my heart because they're the ones that are making this happen as well. They're putting their all on it, and they're the ones who've been not giving up on me. My cousin especially, that she's been looking into laws and looking up and calling people and any new little thing she finds in immigration, she lets my mom know, and especially my mom. I want to thank her, I don't even know how to thank her because my mom, she stepped up and she's done the right thing of taking in my kids when nobody wanted to take them. I don't know how to repay my mom because my mom's still doing it. She's still taking care of my 3 kids, and they're a handful because taking care of 3 kids, especially in these ages, is not easy.
Teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers, because now they ask, they want. And they're good kids. My kids are good kids. They're not bad. They're respectful kids. They're lovable kids. Everywhere they go, they always give me good feedback on my kids, that they're good kids, especially that they look like me and they resemble me, that they're good kids, they have good manners. They're good kids. They're still in school, At 15, I had a different lifestyle,
Yeah. Alejandro, I know that we're coming close to ending our time together.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, I forgot to ask you or that you think is important to share with folks?
Well, that I think is that our voice needs to be heard. We can't be scared of this situation. We got to let our story be known. And if it doesn't help me, as long as it helps somebody else, I'm happy with that because I can get back to my life and my kids. But other than that, I just want everybody to know that, it's a real struggle for people like me to be in this situation because we're being displayed as something else that we're not. But we're just trying to be here where we were born, where we were left and brought, and just make our life, and pick up our kids and keep up with our lives.
Thank you so much, Chloe. I know one day Alejandro will watch this, and so I want to thank Alejandro again for sharing his story with us. We firmly believe here at CILP that we can't have conversations about immigration policy or law without centering the voices and experiences of those impacted by them. And we're really grateful to be joined by Norma, Alejandro's mother, and Elizabeth, Alejandro's cousin, If I can please ask you to turn on your cameras. Hi, Norma. Hi, Elizabeth. I think you're on mute.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us. I know it's super tough to hear Alejandro's words, to not be able to see him. And I really, really thank you for being with us. Norma, me gustaría empezar con usted, por favor. ¿Qué piensas al escuchar las palabras de Alex y cómo ha cambiado su vida y la vida de sus nietos al estar Alejandro en este problema con el sistema migratorio? No hay problema, Norma. No hay problema. Elizabeth, what are you all feeling after seeing his words? I know that you have been an incredible part of Alex's village and helping out and helping your grandmother, Norma. I want folks to understand the impact that these laws have on families like yours, if you're able to share right now.
Well, as you can see, it's very emotional for his mother and myself. Hearing it personally come from him, how he was just a kid. He was 18. You know, when he began fighting to be home. Like he said himself, he's been here since he was in diapers. All he knows is San Diego. All he knows is the American culture. And I got very emotional when he said that when he was deported and he was thrown onto the side that he's from, because that's where his mother gave birth. Nobody embraced him. Nobody welcomed him. You would expect that he would blend in, but it was the opposite. He stood out, like he said, like a sore thumb. He stood out. Even though I was born here, you know, I grew up with Alejandro. The only difference is that my mother gave birth on this side of the border and his mom gave birth on the other side of the border. However, we were both raised in San Diego. You know, we both went to school here. Our first language is Spanish, but we went to school to learn English just like everybody else. You know, TV, movies, hanging out with friends, the weekends, field trips, amusement parks, everything was done here. So he doesn't know the culture in Mexico. And like he said, even though I was born there, I wasn't welcome there. And all he's trying to do is just to be home. This is his home. And this is where his family is. This is where his children are. And like he said himself, his kids, they don't understand immigration laws. They don't understand why their dad can't be here, why they can't do movie night, where's pizza night with dad, you know, cleaning up the lakes. I mean, come on. He's just another, a good dad, because we see that there's plenty of bad fathers all over the world. And he's a dad that's very involved in his children's lives, as you can see in the pictures. You know, every picture that you see of him and his kids, they're always holding on to their dad. And I think it's because they want to just cherish that moment, because they don't know when they're going to see him again. So that's the impact that this loss hurt, you know, that they take on families like Alejandro's. And I'm just speaking as his cousin, his mom here. You know, this is his mother. This is the woman that gave birth to him. This is the woman that raised him. This is the woman that continues to do everything for him and for his children. So I think she can probably give you more insight on how it's affecting them as a family. I'm a cousin that sees what's going on. So I'd really like for his mom to share her thoughts on this.
If she's able, Norma, si nos puede platicar tantito de qué está sintiendo y cómo ha afectado estas leyes migratorias a su familia.
han afectado bastante, porque México es mi país, lo quiero, pero desgraciadamente se ha vuelto muy, muy violento, aparte con los que deportan, porque no creen que son mexicanos, que son pochos, que llegan a burlarse de nosotros allá en México. Tuve la experiencia con mi otro hijo, él también igual, lo traje desde pequeño, lo deportaron, fue perseguido en México por la policía, lo golpeaban varias veces. Y desgraciadamente una de esas veces me lo mataron, ya no está conmigo. Y ahora mi temor es de que deporten otra vez a Alejandro y que vuelva a pasar lo mismo.
Norma, gracias. Yo sé que es súper, súper difícil hablar ahorita. Las voy a dejar tantito porque está muy fuerte y lamento tanto lo que le ha pasado a su familia y a su otro hijo. Lo que queremos hacer ahorita es entender por qué está Alejandro en la cárcel, por qué están separando a familias como están separando a familias con estas leyes. Les voy a pedir que apaguen su cámara tantito y después regreso con ustedes. I want to zoom out a little bit from Alejandro's story because, as you know, Alejandro is not alone. He's one of thousands of men, predominantly Mexican and Latine, that are serving time in federal prison for these crimes. And to talk to us about this, I want to bring in Ingrid Eagly. Ingrid, if you can please turn your camera on. Hi, Ingrid. I think that your audio is on and not your camera.
It is on, it's just not restarting for some reason.
There you go. Hi, Ingrid.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. You know, Ingrid is a UCLA law professor who has also been a public defender here in Los Angeles. Ingrid, can you give us the big picture here? Why is Alejandro in federal prison for an immigration offense? And what exactly are illegal entry and reentry?
Great, yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to start out by thanking Alejandro and his family for sharing their story. I think hearing about his struggle to be here, the country where he grew up, and to raise his children that he loves, I think really goes to the heart of why we all came together today, which is to understand the racist origins of these unjust border laws. So to answer your question more specifically, there are two main categories of border crossing crimes, which we refer to in practice by their section where they lie in the federal criminal code, 1325 and 1326. Illegal entry, or section 1325, criminalizes simply the act of crossing the border without permission. Its sister section, 1326, is illegal re-entry, and that criminalizes simply crossing the border after having been deported in the past and carries a penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison. Listening to Alejandro just now really brought me back to a time when I was a federal public defender earlier in my career here in Los Angeles. That was during the George W. Bush administration in the Central District, where the United States Attorney has long focused their work on prosecuting Latinos for border crossing, the same crime as Alejandro found himself prosecuted for, 1326. At the time I was a public defender, 1/3 of all of the cases brought by federal prosecutors in our district were for illegal reentry. It was the largest category of crime, more than federal drug cases, fraud cases, weapons cases, any other category that you might think that federal prosecutors are busy doing. And during the Trump administration, just prior to COVID, immigration crime prosecutions reached an all-time high, 59% of all federal prosecutions across the United States. And persons charged in these cases were then, as they are today, exclusively Latino and mainly Mexican. So many who I represented when I was a federal public defender had, just like Alejandro, grown up in the United States and were returning to be reunited with their parents, their wives, their children, their grandchildren, and other loved ones. Immigration crimes were prosecuted then and are now, unlike any other crimes in the federal system, in ways that cut corners, coerce pleas, and limit access to counsel. For illegal entry, the United States Attorney's Office has long relied on a zero-tolerance scheme to bring mass prosecutions in border districts of up to 80 people in a single courtroom, entering mass pleas in unison. And since the 1990s, the United States Attorney's Office has relied on what's known as a fast track, a system for prosecuting felony illegal reentry cases under Section 1326. Under the fast track, individuals charged with illegal reentry are given a very short time fuse for accepting a plea agreement. Unlike in any other category of crime, this means inadequate time to meet with counsel, to have their case investigated, or even to get complete discovery from the government. These inherently coercive plea offers mean that most everyone pleads guilty, allowing the government to prosecute more and more Latinos under these crimes.
Ingrid, one of the things that I thought when I was, studying this and reading up on this was, in immigration prison and in immigration courts, folks don't have access to attorneys, don't have, access to bond hearings, don't have a right, to counsel. And I was like, well, at least in the criminal context, which these are put in right now, at least they have public defenders, at least they have the same rights that the criminal justice system provides those being charged by it, but that's not the case.
Well, it is the case that public defenders are appointed, and we'll be seeing just how important that is now and the challenges that we'll be talking about. But it is also the case that systemically, the way they've set up the prosecutions in both magistrate courts and federal district courts has been executed in a way to really limit access to counsel, to limit the procedural rights, and to ensure that these cases go quickly through the court system. And that's really unlike the way we think of the criminal legal system, at least in the federal system, which is sort of thought as the gold standard of how it functions, where people do have time to meet with counsel, where they, can be released on bond. People in these cases are always detained. So a lot of the ways in which you've just described the civil immigration system functions have in some ways been imported into the criminal legal system.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'll come back to you in a little bit. I really appreciate that. And I want to introduce and welcome Kara Hartlzer, please. Kara, if you can turn on your camera. Hi, Kara. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Kara Hartlzer is an appellate attorney of the Federal Defenders of San Diego and also worked at the Florence Project in Arizona. Kara, pick up where Ingrid left off and please describe your experience defending people against these charges in Arizona and now in San Diego.
So in Arizona, I was actually working for a nonprofit immigration organization called the Florence Project. So we were working on the civil immigration side, where I would go into detention centers where people were being held to see an immigration judge, and I would try to advise them of their options and their rights and give them advice. And I always knew that there was this kind of shadow parallel system that was also prosecuting people for a crime of having returned to the United States or coming into the United States in the first place. And sometimes, my clients would go to the criminal court and then come to us, or they'd go from immigration court to criminal court. But there were always these two tracks. And, a lot of times people would say, well, isn't that double jeopardy? Or aren't I being punished for the same thing twice? But the reality is that they can not only be deported, but charged and prosecuted and imprisoned for years and even decades for the act of coming back to the United States.
And around there's these prosecutions have been going on. They've been ballooning over the past 20 years, and some of them have kind of permeated into pop culture because of their inhumanity. At 2007, 2008. Tell us about Operation Streamline, And I believe we have a picture that was leaked of Operation Streamline that we can show the audience. Tell us about what happened with Operation Streamline in these mass courts.
So Operation Streamline started, it was first started in 2005, and then it sort of spread along the southwestern border. I was in Arizona when it came in 2008, and immediately all of these resources were taken up in Arizona federal courts by images very much like this of people, being brought in by the dozens and dozens and in shackles, going before judges in these mass hearings where you really question deeply whether anyone understands, what's being said at the front of this very big courtroom, and what they're agreeing to, and how this could possibly be an accurate representation of our criminal system. So that started in Arizona in 2008, but it never actually came to San Diego until 2018. And at that point, a couple of years earlier, I had moved to San Diego and begun working not in the civil immigration system, but now in the federal criminal system as a public defender.
And in 2018 was another one of these moments. Chloe, if we can take the picture down. In 2018 was another one of these moments where this permeated into our popular culture, and actually how these laws were used created a national uproar that made the Trump administration stop doing this. Tell us what happened in 2018, please.
So San Diego had never had Operation Streamline, but in April of 2018, Attorney General Jeff Sessions came out to San Diego and announced this zero tolerance policy and said everyone that could be prosecuted should be prosecuted, and even for the misdemeanor version. In other words, even the first time you cross the border, even if you're an asylum seeker, you should be criminally prosecuted. And what this zero tolerance policy meant is that if you have a family who's traveling together and they have a minor child and you're prosecuting both parents, where does that child go? Well, that child got taken and sent off to, any number of places. And we now know no plan whatsoever for reuniting these parents and the children with each other. So we suddenly had many, many clients who could barely focus on their own criminal case because they were just sick with grief over where their children had been taken, what would happen to them, when they would ever see them again. And as a result of these practices and the incredible effect that they were having on our clients, we decided to try to do everything in our power to fight back against this zero tolerance policy.
And at this point, something happens. You've been defending these cases for a long time, with arguments. Actually, can you describe before 2018, what was your principal defense in these cases? How are you getting these folks out of federal prison, or not even in federal prison, before they got there?
Well, it's tough because, as Ingrid described, there are these mechanisms that make it a lot easier for someone to plead guilty than to try to fight their case. If someone wanted to try to fight their federal criminal case, then we would do anything we could. We would file motions, we would take the case to trial. But many times people knew that if they didn't fight their case, they would probably get out of jail sooner. So we often didn't fight these cases. But then it just became too much. The inhumanity of it became too much to not try to bring some systemic challenges on behalf of all of our clients. And that's when some people in our office read for the first time this article in the Washington Post featuring the work of Kelly Lytle Hernández.
And we have Kelly here with us. Thank you so much, Kara. We'll come back to you in a second. Kelly, what Kara read that day was a public-facing piece from a book that you published in 2017, City of Inmates, Conquest, Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging in Los Angeles. You're a UCLA history professor. We are popping that article into the chat right now so that people can read it. Kelly, tell us about the tribal 20s that you described. What was going on in the United States at the time that these laws were enacted?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for facilitating this really important conversation. So people often think about the 20s in the United States as the jazz age, right? Or this really swinging time, but it also was a period of the consolidation of white supremacy. You had the rise of lynchings, you had the tightening of Jim Crow, you had the science of eugenics. This is all happening during the 1920s. And what's important to our conversation here is that it's during the 1920s that Congress adopts a whites preferred immigration regime that categorically bans all Asians from entering the country, that effectively bans all Africans from entering the country, that criminalizes the most popular pathway of Mexican immigration to the United States, and adopts a national origin system that wildly privileges European immigrants, namely Western European immigrants. So it's the adoption of this immigration regime, and in particular the anti-Mexican pillar of it, that we're talking about here today. Do you want me to go?
What was kind of what was like the jargon? How were, you discovered what was, being said on, the House floors and in these committees, and, how were Mexicans even talked about by these folks when these laws were enacted?
Sure. Well, the first targets were Chinese and Asian immigrants who were seen as being racial outsiders, religious outsiders. So you have the Chinese Exclusion Act that goes on in 1917 to be the Asiatic Barred Zone with this highly racialized language against Asian immigrants. There's also a language that's targeting Jewish immigrants, Greek immigrants, Russian immigrants as being non-white or inferior races of Europe. And that leads to the National Origins Act of 1924. What's really important to note about that is that when the eugenicists in Congress who are talking about these inferior and superior races and the dangers of mixing bloods that will infiltrate the superior white race, at that time, they weren't quite sure where Southern Europeans fit, but they banned them in 1924. And they begin to turn their attention then to Mexican immigrants who are still allowed to immigrate. And so I'm going to read a couple quotes to you all about the language they were using when they were talking about Mexican immigrants and the importance of creating a new tactic or tool to keep Mexican immigrants out. So one of the proponents of Mexican exclusion was this man named Madison Grant, who had written this text, a very popular book called The Passing of the Great Race. He was a eugenicist and a white supremacist. Hitler actually called his book, The Passing of the Great Race, his own Bible. And the Nazi regime cherished this work. Madison Grant wrote, if the specialized qualities of the white race and a white civilization generally are thought worth preserving in the United States, the admixture of the blood of a Mexican Indian can only be regarded as hurtful. At the same time, the Secretary of Labor in the United States, a man named James Davis, declared the 1924 law, which left the door open to Mexico. He said that law was, quote, disastrous because we closed the front door to immigration and left the back door wide open. And John C. Box, who was an advocate for ending Mexican immigration, said, the most dangerous immigration now facing us is that from Mexico. And he talked often about this mongrel race of the Mexicans that's part Spanish, part Mexican, and part Indian. And a man named Coleman Livingston Blease, who was a senator out of South Carolina and would eventually bring the 1929 Act that's at the heart of our conversation today. He would bring that to the floor of Congress. He wrote, I want them, the Mexicans, kept out, or we will kill them. So this is the intensity of the anti-Mexican language during this time period and rhetoric. And they're able to win Mexican exclusion through the criminalization of unsanctioned border crossings or unreported border crossings in 1929. What's important here is that this is a facially neutral law. They don't say it's targeting Mexicans in particular, but they had done studies to find that Mexican immigrants often enter the United States without registering at a port of entry. Why would you do that? It was expensive and difficult to go to a port of entry. There'd been a long history and tradition of Mexicans and U.S. citizens crossing the border at will. And Mexicans at the ports of entry were often subjugated to really egregious conditions, health exams, caustic baths, and more. So they didn't go through the ports of entry. And that's why they targeted unregistered border crossings. So they knew it would target Mexican immigrants in particular. And the law that they passed in 1929 made it a misdemeanor to enter the United States without authorization and a felony to return to the United States after deportation without authorization. That is precisely the law that Kara and the others are challenging today.
Kelly, when I hear this history, I can't help but think of how the criminalization and discrimination against African-American, particularly African-American men, has shaped our view, whether we know it or not, of a whole population. And here you have, can I draw the parallel of, here you have the over-incarceration and criminalization of Mexican men, which to this day remains a stereotype. Am I making a right parallel there?
Well, you're absolutely making the right parallel. And it's important to note that as we have the rise of mass incarceration since the 1970s, which disproportionately targets Black and Indigenous folks, it's the increasing enforcement of this 1929 law that leads to the criminalization and over incarceration of Mexicans in particular. So these moments in time, the rise and consolidation of Jim Crow, leading to the adoption of a whites preferred immigration regime that criminalizes Mexican border crossings, is absolutely connected to what Michelle Alexander calls the rise of the new Jim Crow and mass incarceration and the increasing enforcement of this law since the 1980s.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'll bring you back in a second. I want to go to Norma and Elizabeth. Si pueden prender su cámara, por favor. If you can turn on your camera, Norma and Elizabeth. Hi, again, I want to stop here because this is new information for a lot of folks. And I want to know how you feel about the fact that, what Kelly just described, what Kara just described, the laws that are imprisoning Alejandro were meant so that Mexican men and Mexicans wouldn't come and wouldn't stay. And they were written by people who believed Mexicans were inferior. Can you please just give me some reactions to what you think, what you're thinking right now as we're learning all this?
Sí, porque nos siguen discriminando a los mexicanos. Y como dijeron ustedes, Alex, ahora sí que el único error que cometió es regresarse. Y a lo mejor me amanezco repetida, pero lo que él quiere es regresar con sus hijos. Y sus hijos también lo extrañan demasiado. Ellos quieren estar con su papá. Y pues yo solamente le pido a Jehová Dios que haga algo para Alejandro, para que se reúna con sus niños. Yo solamente soy la abuela. Él es el papá. Y pues desgraciadamente los niños no cuentan con su mamá. Entonces él sería el papá y la mamá. Pero que se queden aquí así como estaba antes, que iba a la escuela, estaba al pendiente de ellos. El niño más pequeño hace 3 años, tenía 4. Yo lo llevaba al parque y lo subí una vez al columpio y miró a los otros papás y me dice, colúmpiame como papá. Y yo me quedé sorprendida. ¿Cómo como papá? Dice, como papá. Y señalaba al otro niño que lo columpiara como papá. Y ya entendí que él quería que lo columpiara su papá.
Qué fuerte.
Son muchas cosas muy tristes.
Es muy fuerte, y es muy fuerte conocer la historia. Elizabeth, I know you've been studying up on laws and all of this stuff, and I really want to hear your opinion about this.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to both Kelly and Ingrid and Kara for sharing their knowledge with us, because I'll be honest, I feel a little embarrassed and ashamed being a Chicana. I don't know my history, and I can relate to Alejandro when he says that he's not accepted in Mexico. I don't know if you guys saw the movie Selena, but there's a scene where the dad tells Selena, you have to be more Mexican than a Mexican, and you have to be more American than American. It's hard to be Mexican American, and it is really hard because going to Mexico, or even speaking to my family that's from Mexico, I can't communicate the way that I would like to, because my Spanish isn't perfect. Or even though I can speak Spanish, I can't vocalize what I'm really thinking, because I think in English, you know, and I dream in English. I don't wake up and say, oh, that dream that I had last night, we were speaking Spanish. It's all in English. And in here as an American, I've been, oh man, how many times have I not, you know, been an object of racism? I remember probably the first time hearing somebody say something racist to me. I must have been about 8 years old. We were crossing the street to go, it was after on a Sunday, we were going to go eat lunch at a Chinese buffet in downtown, and there was a homeless on the street who was white, and who threw something at me, and he said, go back to your country, go back to where you're from. And I go, well, I was born here. And I had never been to Mexico by the age of 8. I think I was 13 the first time I went to Tijuana. And going to school, I was always in advanced classes. So there was very few Latinas. It was like me and 2 other girls, Luz Mendoza and Stephanie something. But I remember going into a cultural shock in the 6th grade, because there was all these girls that were light skinned with color eyes and blonde hair. And I felt so out of place, because here I am, you know, I'm tan, I have black hair. I came from a school where everybody looked like me, and I was coming into a school, everybody looked so different, and everybody was talking about the Navy and Navy housing and it was like a foreign language to me. So even though I was born here, I grew up here, I felt very different. So I can relate to how Alejandro feels. And when Kara was talking about how these families were separated and the kids were being taken away, it just made me feel so fortunate that Alejandro has his mother who took the kids in, but it almost didn't really happen like that. The mom gave up custody of the children. She completely abandoned them. She left them in a garage with her brother.
And Norma was able to become the guardian.
But she almost didn't. They were this close to going into the foster system. But grandma came in and she said, these are my son's babies, and they're my babies, and there's no way that they're going to go into the foster system. They have somebody here. They have family here. But it's so sad for the families who don't have a Norma, who don't have a grandma that can speak up for them. And they're in this system, and they don't know when they're going to see their parents again. And when Kelly was talking about the origin of this law, it's just touching a little nerve in me, because I'm actually in school right now, and I'm actually learning about the laws that were taking place so that Black men could be free, so that Black men could vote, you know. And I could go on and on, but I won't.
Well, here's the thing. So at this point, thank you, Norma and Elizabeth. I'm going to ask Kara and Kelly to come in here now, because the Trump administration starts separating children. Kara reads an article of Kelly's with the racist origins. Tell us what happened.
So we didn't know what to do. I mean, Norma and Elizabeth were talking about being embarrassed. We were desperately embarrassed. Here we are, these public defenders were supposed to be standing up for our clients, but we're defending them against these charges that are based on the most noxious, horrific racism that you can think of. And, I don't think hardly any people working in the federal defender's office had any idea about this history. And so then we thought, well, we have to, we can't just keep kind of going on like we were. We have to figure out a way to at least bring this to light or bring it up or talk about it in some context or some way. And we're lawyers, and what we know how to do is write motions. So we thought, well, let's figure out a way to challenge this on the basis of an equal protection violation. Let's say that this law is unconstitutional. And so we started digging around. And as Kelly mentioned earlier, the law is facially neutral. It doesn't say in the text of the law, Mexicans stay out. But the intent of the law is still relevant under some of the Supreme Court case law from the past. So we decided to write this motion, and we just emailed Kelly out of the blue and said, to do this kind of challenge, I think we're going to need historians. We're going to need support from people like you who know all this history that we don't. Would you be willing to help? And I'll let Kelly talk about it from there.
Well, I was absolutely thrilled to get that email, and I think we were talking within the hour, something like that. So for me as a historian, to see history on trial and for us to talk honestly about the legacies that we live with today and how they are a part of our institutions, our cultures, and our practices is a highlight of my career. And so I'm very honored to be able to be part of these conversations. I am emboldened by people like Kara and Norma and Elizabeth, and everybody who are really going to the front lines to take on the racist legacies of these laws. So bravo to all of us. And I hope that we come out stronger through the organizing the campaign.
Thank you. Kara, tell me the main arguments that you make in these briefs. I know that you're going to argue one soon, or you're going to present in the Ninth Circuit. But explain to us, bottom line, what are the main arguments that you're making in these briefs challenging the constitutionality of 1326?
So there's a Supreme Court case called Arlington Heights. And in a nutshell, what that case says is that if there was a law that was passed with discrimination, it's one of the motivators, then it doesn't have to be the primary motivator. It just has to be like one of the reasons that the law passed. If you can prove that, if you can show it, then the burden shifts to whoever is trying to uphold the law. In this case, it's the government. And the government then has to show that this law would have passed even without a racist intent. So we wrote a motion and said, look, here's this huge history of racism. Here's all the quotes and a lot more, that Kelly talked about, and quotes that will just make your stomach turn. And so we put all this into a motion. We attached Kelly's declaration. We asked for evidentiary hearings where historians could come in, and we just started filing these in case after case after case. And then we sent this motion out to federal defender offices and lawyers across the country, and they started filing it in case after case after case. And so we just tried to, if nothing else, make this history known so that, when you have a criminal system that is using more than half of its resources to prosecute a law that is based on racism, at a minimum, people need to know that this is the decision that is being made by the government to use their resources in this way.
And so you send this out, everybody starts filing them, and last year something happens in Nevada. Ingrid, I want you to join us here as well, please. But let's start with what happened in Nevada last year that was historic and kind of one of the reasons why we're here and what's happening in December. Kara, what happened in Nevada last year?
We won. We won.
Which means that a federal judge declared that these
federal
laws
judge declared 1326, which is the law that Alejandro was convicted of, and the reason why he is currently in prison. A judge said that that law was unconstitutional for the reasons that we put in our motion. This judge had heard a lot of testimony. Kelly testified, another expert from San Diego also testified. And this judge agreed that the law was based on a racist intent. Racism was one of the motivating factors, and the government hadn't shown that this law would have passed even without that racist intent. So the person in that case was ultimately, the charges were dismissed because the law couldn't be used against him because of its unconstitutional origins.
And at this point, the Biden administration has a choice to make. A federal judge declares these laws unconstitutional. The Biden administration can say, we are an administration that's committed to racial justice, like they've said over and over, and therefore we're just going to stop prosecuting these, or they can appeal. And they appealed.
They appealed.
I want to just open this up. What are the main points of their appeal? How are they arguing that a law that every historian has looked at and said is racist is not?
Well, I think one of the things they're saying is maybe that was just a handful of legislators. Maybe it wasn't everyone who was racist in 1929, but maybe it was just a couple people and they said some unfortunate things, but the law wasn't really based on racism. I think there's a lot of ways that we have to disprove that. It was not just a couple legislators, it was a lot of legislators, and it was the leaders that really pushed it through, who were themselves eugenicists, who themselves said terrible, terrible things about Mexicans. So I think that's one of the ways that we've tried to push back. Another thing that they've tried to say is, well, even if the law was racist in 1929, it was later reenacted in 1952, and then it was amended a couple later times. And there's not necessarily any evidence that those later reenactments or amendments were racist. But we've come back and we've actually shown a lot of evidence that actually in 1952, several years before Brown versus Board of Education, there was still a lot of racist intent. In fact, the 1924 law that Kelly talks about, they decided to uphold that. So there are a lot of ways that the government has tried to push back against our legal arguments, but I think we have good answers for them.
Kelly, as a historian, what's your reaction to what the Biden administration is arguing in their appeals?
Well, I am hopeful that this is a moment that we can reconsider the full ecosystem of legislation and laws, especially in the criminal legal system, that have landed us where we are today, where disproportionate numbers of African Americans, Indigenous folks, and Latinx immigrants are the ones who are filling our courthouses and our jails and our prisons. So I'm hoping that these kinds of cases and these kinds of laws can take us back to the day when we created the rules that we live by today that are delivering such disparate impact upon our families, our neighbors, ourselves. And so that's what I'm hoping for. And so it's concerning that they have appealed this ruling, because this is an incredible opportunity for an administration that has declared itself to be on the side of racial justice to go ahead, open its eyes, open up the history books, and start to unwind the decisions that were made in the past to create the conditions of today.
Absolutely. Ingrid, can you just describe to our audience what would happen if the Biden administration decided not to appeal? What literally would have happened to all of these 1326 cases and to all of the families that are separated because of them?
Well, the government would no longer be able to bring the cases, at least in that district, while, as that decision would become, law and unchallenged. Unfortunately, appeals are, pretty common in the criminal legal system, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has, rarely declined the opportunity to try to defend a conviction. And I think particularly in this situation where, notwithstanding the clearly racist origins of the law and the, decision of the district court judge, I think prosecuting these cases has long been, sort of what the Department of Justice was built on and the bread and butter of their work. Appealing does go against, sort of the core principles of the Biden administration and centering, racial justice in sort of their goals, particularly in the context of the criminal legal system, and trying to eliminate just the discriminatory impact of those laws on Black and Brown communities. I think it's also surprising, hearing how Kara's described the sort of arguments that they're making in the appeal that really goes against the uncontroverted history that Kelly has unearthed, and other historians as well, and it also cites two cases that have long been discredited that upheld things during the era of Chinese exclusion, like the one white witness
I want to talk about those
really
two. Ingrid, I want to talk about those two specifically. So thank you, please. So there's two cases that the Biden administration cites in their appeal trying to say that this isn't racist, that in fact are racist themselves. And it's Fang Yueting and the Muslim ban. Ingrid, Kara, Kelly, whoever, can you explain to us how they're citing this to defend this and what these cases are?
I don't want to put words in the government's mouth. And so I'll actually turn it over to Ingrid or Kelly.
Ingrid, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, the Fang Yueting case that Gabriela mentioned is a case that is remembered for upholding the one white witness rule during the era of Chinese exclusion, which provided that in order to sort of show that you still had lawful presence, you had to do so with a credible white witness in court, and the Supreme Court upheld that. And many of the laws from obviously Chinese exclusion is no longer the law, and the law itself has progressed, and we now have this Arlington Heights standard that Kara is using to challenge the racist 1929 illegal entry and reentry laws based on their racist origins. So I think going back to an earlier time and citing those earlier cases in the government's briefs sort of shows a reliance on an earlier standard.
Folks, we're coming near to the end of our time here, and I want to see if there's questions, but something that I want to stress is that this is all happening in real time, right? So the conversation that Kara had with Kelly was, we're in 2022, was 2 years ago, right? Was in about 2 or 3 years ago. And, it's history coming out of academia and coming out into the courts, being explained. And as I said, in real time. Kara, you have a very important day on December 8th. Can you tell us what's going to be happening on December 8th, please?
On December 8th, myself and Dean Erwin Chemerinsky from the UC Berkeley School of Law are going to be presenting oral arguments in 2 cases that present this issue. And these are the first 2 cases in the Ninth Circuit. Dean Chemerinsky is going to be representing the person in the Nevada case who won, and I'm going to be representing a person out of our district who lost. So we're going to be asking the Ninth Circuit to uphold the Nevada decision and say that that was the right call. In the meantime, there are a lot of cases in other circuits. Just yesterday, there was an opening brief filed in the Second Circuit. There's cases in the 3rd, the 4th, the 11th, the 5th, the 10th. I'm probably forgetting some. But we're trying to have all of these cases go up to the highest courts and to really, force judges to confront the history of this law and tell us why Arlington Heights doesn't compel this conclusion when the record is so clear on the racist intent underlying this law. So stay tuned. December 8th, we'll have, I know we'll have more news.
And you'll hear more news, and you can actually watch these arguments online. They'll be streaming, so keep an eye out on CILPs, social media, etc., because we're all going to be rooting for you, Kara, and I think you have probably hundreds more people that are watching now that are also going to be rooting for you on that day. I want to invite Norma and Elizabeth back on, please, and I want to open this up for questions. We're coming near the end, and I want to just check in the chat to make sure that we have questions. And we do. We have a question from Gerson Cortez. There's a conversation about the criminality of entry without authorization. Some call it a civil offense, not technically a criminal act. Is that an accurate description? I think that's what 1326 and 1325 changed. But Kara, I'll let you explain that.
Sure, it's both. It's civil and it's criminal. There is the Immigration and Nationality Act that says that when a person is not here lawfully, they can go in front of an immigration judge and they can be deported. But in addition, on top of that, there is also a separate criminal code, 1325 and 1326, that makes it a crime that you can be imprisoned for. And the 1326 says that you can be imprisoned for up to 20 years. So it's not just a matter of deportation, it's also a matter of punishing it like you would punish any other crime, burglary, robbery, anything else. And I think that most people would be shocked to know that when when we think about federal crimes, we think about terrorism or drug trafficking or things like this. But as we've talked about, this is the most prosecuted federal crime by a long shot. This is what the Department of Justice is using their resources to do. And so don't be lulled into the idea that it's just a matter of a civil deportation. It is absolutely a crime. And that's what, all these cases are about.
And there's also this, super cynical thing, which is, they're charged with federal crimes, they're put into federal prison, and literally as soon as they get out of federal prison, they're put into ICE prison, and then they're deported. It's right. This like toss off of human beings. There's a question from Amanda Valencia. What's the difference from the 1326 law and the 9C bar from IRA?
So the 9C bar, do you want to take this, Ingrid? I'm not talking a lot. Okay, so the 9C bar is basically a bar that would prevent you from getting lawful status in the future. So for instance, if Alejandro were in Mexico, one of the things, and he was trying to get, a green card to come back in the future, one of the things that immigration would probably say is, well, no, you aren't eligible to, because the immigration law under this 9C says that you're permanently barred from coming back to the United States. So that is a law that keeps him from getting immigration status in the future. And it's separate than a criminal law like 1325 or 1326 that says that if you come back, we can put you in prison.
Yeah, and I would just add that the bars on inadmissibility, it's so great that you brought them up. I mean, they were passed in 1996 as part of, a series of laws that furthered the criminalization of immigrants. And I think that the inadmissibility bars definitely work together with the 1929 illegal entry and reentry laws in important ways in making even it difficult for people who've lived here for a long period of time to come back and to be with their families, and then makes them susceptible to being prosecuted under the very laws that we're talking about today that were passed with the racist intent.
I think of how bipartisan the prosecution of these crimes is. You look at, these graphs in Ingrid's papers, which I know that we put in the chat, And the graph about prosecution goes up, 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 up. It starts with George W. Bush, then there's President Obama, then there's President Trump, now there's President Biden. So, it's one of those things that you can't blame either side. They're just all in on these prosecutions, which criminalize people that want to be reunited with their family, basically. Sarah Rich has a question. Is it possible to follow the development of these various cases in different districts and circuits in a central location? Great question. Kara, I believe we have some of our partner organizations that are tracking this. The National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild, NIPNLG would be a place where I would send folks. And thank you for wanting to track this. We need your support. Kara, do you have any other suggestions of where folks can go to track these cases?
Yeah, NIPNLG is wonderful. NIJC, the National Immigrant Justice Center, which is also one of the partners we've been working with very closely. They've done a lot of reports, and they're doing a great job of trying to push forward legislation. There's some legislation called the New Way Forward that they are working very hard to try to push. And you can always reach out to them or go to their website and find out what's going on, not just with these cases, but with the movement to try to change the law on this in general. I'm sure I'm forgetting other wonderful partners we've worked with, but those are two great places. And obviously the UCLA Center, who's sponsoring this, is also a great source of information.
Thank you, Kara. This is another great question. Is there any way we can put pressure on the Biden administration to drop their appeal? Ingrid, Kelly. Outside pressure, yeah.
I think just, things like today, just raising awareness, right? The more people that understand, what's at stake here, the history of the laws that Kelly has brought forward and the arguments that are being put forth, both by Kara and other Erwin Chemerinsky and others, as well as those of the government. I think the more that people's reactions to these cases will be considered, hopefully, by the government as they consider whether to appeal other cases.
Thank you, Ingrid. We have a question from Jesse Franzblau. He says, "Thank you so much for this terrific presentation. Can you talk about how the Biden administration is increasing reliance on immigration prosecutions as part of its effort to apply consequences for unlawful immigration, even though there's no evidence whatsoever the prosecutions or other form of punitive enforcement measures deter migration?"
So, I think one of the things that always happens in the political realm is that there's a lot of talk about immigration. There's a lot of talk about how we need to secure the border. There's a lot of sort of frenzy over this. And whenever there's that kind of frenzy, there's this idea that, well, if we just bring the hammer down harder, if we just do more enforcement, if we just, get more Border Patrol agents and more militarization of the border, that'll take care of the problem. And I think what this question is kind of getting at is, will it? Because when you look at someone, like Alejandro, who his entire family is here, I'm not in any way suggesting that Alejandro is going to commit more crimes, but I think it is really, really difficult for a person who has spent their whole life here, who has their family here, to be deterred. It's incredibly difficult. And the other thing I would say is, when you have programs like Operation Streamline, where people are run through this gauntlet, in a matter of hours sometimes, and convicted of a crime, that many of them are very confused. Am I in a criminal court? Am I in an immigration court? It's incredibly difficult for some people to even understand under those circumstances of exhaustion and confusion that they've even been convicted of a crime. And so there is very little research out there that is shows that these laws actually deter people from coming back. And in fact, the evidence shows the opposite, that they do not serve as a deterrent, which leaves us with the question of why are we spending $1.4 billion a year on something that is not a deterrent and doesn't work?
I mean, you've seen it in Alejandro's case with your own eyes. The magnet here is family. Families want to be together, right? So this talk of deterrence, whatever, people, I mean, if they will walk thousands of miles, I mean, you know, it's just so ridiculous to me that the word deterrence even comes in here, right? We have a question about the composition of your panel, Kara, and also the Supreme Courts, because obviously the next step would be to go there. It says, given the present composition of the Supreme Court, is there any expectation that the Supreme Court would strike down 1326? And does Mrs. Hartlzer know the makeup of the panel for her arguments?
So we will not know the makeup of the Ninth Circuit panel until November 28th. We'll find out that morning. As to the Supreme Court, you know, I think anyone who is familiar with the Supreme Court knows that we would be facing a very uphill battle. But I think that it's not just about winning in court. I think that that is a stepping stone to something much bigger and much more important, which is to ask ourselves these hard questions about our racial history and to ask if this is who we want to be. Are these the laws we want to have on our books? You know, with child separation, there was such a huge outcry that ultimately President Trump stopped that policy. And there is nothing preventing a similar outcry from moving mountains here. So even though I'm a lawyer, I don't want the law to be the only answer.
I mean, the public pressure, and as somebody who's been in the immigration field for about 25 years, the thing that seems to work, obviously, is the shame of this. Is the shame of an administration that says it's committed to racial justice and is defending laws that were written by people who believed the white race was superior and they didn't want Mexicans here, right? We have some questions on how to get involved, you know, whether or not this will be available, how to get involved. Please follow all of us on social media. We'll be sending to all of the folks who joined us the articles that we discussed. The hashtag that we're using is End1326. There's no confusion there. And you know, before we end, Norma and Elizabeth, I really want to thank you. Thank you for being here, for sitting through this, and give you an opportunity to get the last word in here. ¿Cómo estamos, Norma? He escuchado muchas cosas.
Sí, muchas cosas que a mí se me han hecho una labor tan hermosa, no nada más para que se oiga la voz de Alejandro, sino que se oigan todas las que están atrás de él y que reúnan con sus familias. Eso es lo que queremos.
Gracias,
Soy
Norma.
madre,
Gracias.
tengo mis hijos y nunca los he dejado. Siempre han estado conmigo y todavía está la prueba que sigo con Alejandro y con los niños de él. Y yo quiero que asisten todas las familias unidas y juntas. Y yo sé que un día vamos a estar todos juntos.
Ay, eso espero,
Gracias
Norma.
por todo.
A ustedes, a ustedes. Elizabeth, do you have anything that you would like to say?
I just want to say thank you to everyone that's part of this. Thank you to you, Gabriela, for reaching out to Alejandro, taking the time to make that phone call happen, for coming down to San Diego and meeting us. Thank you, Kara, for the soldier that you are. You're the one that's going, to the front of the line. And I admire you for your courage, for your bravery, for standing up, and for being the voice for so many, many families. So thank you so much. Kelly, thank you so much for writing that article that opened up the road to this, this journey that we're all on. Thank you for opening up, my eyes to my history, because I had no idea, I'm just a daughter of 2 immigrants that came here and wanted a better life for their kids, but I'm learning more about my history. So thank you so much for that. Ingrid, my goodness, thank you so much as well for being a part of this, and for everything that you girls are doing, and whoever else that I'm missing right now. I'm so sorry, but I have so many thoughts and emotions, but I want to say thank you all. And just on a final note, I know that we've been talking about family and how this separates families, but it's not just families. People who were brought here, as little children, and we're left with no family. Their family ends up being friends, co-workers who become family, neighbors who become family. So it's not always blood family, but just those friends from school, that embraced them because they didn't speak any English, or the neighbors that helped them out because they saw that they didn't have a mom or a dad. For all of them, just for everyone who wants to have, I don't want to say a better life, but that's really what it is. Because my cousin ran from Mexico. His brother was murdered 3 months ago, and we're very afraid that when he's released, that the same thing could possibly happen. But that's why I want to say thank you all to all of you, each and every one of you. Thank you for what you do, and God bless you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all so very much. I want to go through one more set of thank yous here, because there's a lot of people behind the scenes that made this work. Our editor, Marlon Venerio, Chloe Lynn, our program coordinator here at CILP, Haley Burgess, our communication strategist, Monica Langarica, who's with Norma and Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Monica. And our interpreters who make this accessible in Spanish. Romy Malagamba Stefan, Ada Podolsky, Galia Irigoyen Querecedo, y Enrique Perez Rosiles. Thank you very much. And this is a TBD, folks. This is living, breathing history that we're fighting in the courts. Kara, the best of luck on December 8th. We'll all be watching and cheering for you. And I really, really appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you very, very much.